Good morning, UYWI. How are you this morning? Hey, I want to add a couple of things about Larry that he doesn't know I'm about to say. Many years ago in Philadelphia, we were all a part of something called Kingdom Works. And when we were a part of Kingdom Works, a brother by the name of Bart Campolo was leading that, but in a small hotel room, myself and Ephraim and Larry and Fred O'Dea, if he's still here, and Jeremy Del Rio, we really began to pray about what the Lord would do with youth workers in the mission across our networks. At that time, I was living in Baltimore, of course, Jeremy in New York. Everybody was spread out in different parts, but nobody really knew what the Lord would do in between then and now. Everybody say then and now. And so what started then in prayer has now become a movement because Larry decided to follow the Lord in a different way. He took all of our complaints, our frustrations as youth ministers, bottled them up, put them on his shoulder, and began to create a venue and an outreach that would bless us like this. So for that, I want to say a special and a personal thank you to Larry Acosta for his work with this. That's not supposed to be a part of my preaching minute, so I need you to put that back on the clock. I'm just kidding. So my name is Paul Coty, and I grew up in the state of Iowa. There are probably only 2 or 3 people in the room who understand what I'm about to say next. There's more corn in Iowa than black people. And I was 10%, less than 10% of the population in the state of Iowa, and I learned how to do 2 things pretty significantly and quickly. And one of those things was eat, and the other was to fight. See, I fought early and I fought often because in my head there were too many things I needed to fight for. I was fighting for my life some days. I was fighting for my race on other days. I was fighting for my mother on some other days. And then I began to fight for my siblings on some other days. But what became quickly overwhelming to me is that I needed to figure out how to fight differently. Somebody say fight differently. Before we get started, I'm going to give you a small part of the punchline. Your fight is not in your fist, your fight is in your eyes. It's not how quickly you can pick up your hands, how quickly you can mobilize your feet. Your fight is in what you see. Because, see, you cannot fight what you cannot see. Because you wind up being like, you wind up being looking for a black cat in a dark room that doesn't exist in the first place if you can't see. You wind up in a dark room chasing something that you think exists, but is not really there in the first place. Before you fight, you've got to figure out what you see. I learned a couple of things fighting. I learned that you better know who you're fighting, right? Figure out where you're fighting, know why you're fighting, and you better figure out how you're going to fight. If any of those things were out of order, you could be in for a beatdown. If you fought in the wrong territory, no matter how tough you were, that was a beatdown. If you fought for the wrong reason, you were in store for another beatdown. And definitely, if you did not know how to fight, every time you were in a fight, you were in for a beatdown. But you figure out something pretty quickly, that your fists can't always keep up with your brain. And so you can't swing as often as you think. And the older you get, you figure out there are some things that you can do in your mind that you cannot do with your body. If you're a basketball player, you can make that move that you made years ago in your mind, but your body just will not allow you to make the same move. I haven't gotten there yet, but the problem is we are always in a fight. And I think what the Lord asks us to figure out is which fight is his and which fight is yours. We spend too much time fighting battles that don't belong to us and belong to him. And so when we get beat up like the sons of Sceva, we're trying to figure out why we got jumped the way we did. It was because we were in a fight and in a battle that didn't belong to us in the first place. Help me, somebody. Or you can be like Peter who walks in when the soldiers come in and he takes his knife out of his pocket and he cuts the soldier's ear off. And Jesus, just to prove that he was in the wrong fight, gently gets down, picks up his ear, puts it back on the side of his face. Peter, that was the wrong fight. That fight's not yours, bro. Sons of Sceva walked around trying to cast out demons and didn't even know what they were doing. They walk into a room trying to do things they weren't equipped for. They were actually trying to do it in their own strength, but calling the right names. Sometimes you can call the right name and have the wrong result. Because if you call the wrong name in vain without the right heart, then your results wind up the same way, foolish and finished. They go into this place trying to cast out demons, and they look at them and they say, Paul I know and Jesus I know, but who in the heck are you? And he beat them like they stole something. Took their clothes off, made them run out of the room naked. Now that is a bad beating. But I want to show you a little bit about what it means to fight differently. How to fight with your eyes and not with your hands. I'll say it again, you got to be able to see what you fight. You can't fight with your eyes closed and hope that you're going to connect in the right places. You may wind up on the floor before you wind up on that person's face. Because you can't see him because you've got your eyes closed. Somebody hits you because they've got their eyes open fully and they're watching what you're doing, and you're unable to watch what they're doing because you can't see. So let's go to 2 Kings chapter 6. And we are going to read verses 11 through 20. And this enraged the king of Aram. He summoned his officers and demanded of them, "Tell me which of us is on the side of the king of Israel." "None of us, my lord," the king said, one of his officers, "but Elisha, the prophet, who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom." That's being tuned into the Lord. You can hear somebody else's conversation in another room that you weren't in, that they're speaking, and then communicate it to people. That's being in tune to the Lord. And he says, now, he tells the king of Israel, "Your very words you speak in your bedroom, go find out where he is," the king ordered, "so I can send men and capture him." And the report came back, "He is Dothan." And then he sent horses and chariots and strong forces out to capture him. They went by night and surrounded the city. And when the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. He says, "Oh no, my lord, what shall we do?" the servant asked. "Don't be afraid," the prophet answered. "Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And Elisha prayed, "Open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see." And then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. And so as the enemy came down towards him, Elisha prayed, "Strike this army with blindness." So he struck them with blindness. And Elisha had asked, and Elisha told them, "This is not the road, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will lead you to the man you are looking for." And he led them to Samaria, and then he entered the city. Elijah said, "Now, Lord, open the eyes of these men so they can see." Then the Lord opened their eyes, and they looked, and they were there inside Samaria. Now, I could talk a lot about Elisha, who is the highlight, And I will talk a little bit about him, but his exploits are well known. That this man walked in miracles. He held on to Elijah enough that he had the audacity to ask for a double portion of what Elijah had already done. In other words, Elisha was not afraid to take on more. Right? He's asking, Lord, I want more of you. More than he had, I want more of you. How many times have we ever asked, Lord, I want more of you. I don't want what I have. What was great on this level is mediocre at the next. I need more of you at this next space in ministry, this next event, this next venue, this next task, this next service, Lord. I need more of you. He says, I need more than what my mentor had. The dude who nurtured me, I need more than what he got because you're sending me into another place following him, so I need more. We know how Elisha divided the Jordan River, and we know how he provided oil for a widow so that her oil never ran out. We know how he provided a barren woman with a baby, and then when that child died, he came back and he healed the same baby. We know that Elisha multiplied bread so that people could eat. We know that he gave sight to the blind. This dude's miracles were so ill that he throws a stick in the water to find an axe that had floated to the bottom, and it rose back to the top. That was Elijah walking with Jesus in a double portion, but there was someone with him that did not walk the same way. And we very rarely hear about who this gentleman is. It was his servant, and his name was Gehazi. And Gehazi is much like me and you, and he's much like the disciples, and he goes to bed one way. How many of you have ever gone to bed one night peacefully and woke up the next morning and all hell had broken loose? Gehazi goes to bed peacefully. He's sleeping well, and he wakes up to the scare of his life. I know we don't like to talk about this, but we wake up to more scares in the middle of the night than we're willing to admit. We never really talk about how scared we are about where we're sitting right now, how distressing the situation is, and how much we really need the Lord to intervene. We'd rather stay behind closed doors and pretend like everything is okay. Gehazi is much like the disciples who later on asked the question, Lord, don't you care that we perish? Gehazi wakes up in the morning with mountains and hills that had nothing but mountains and hills and trees. He wakes up the next morning, and he wakes up surrounded by an army. He gets up and he looks around and says, this is way different. Is this a nightmare or is this real? He wakes up and he's got an army surrounding him, and one that he's got sense enough to know that he cannot defeat. Now, it is a bad place to know that you cannot trust God and that you cannot trust you. Because our default is we are going to trust ourselves and then trust God, right? If we're honest, we try our schemes, we try our programs, we try our ministries long before we trust Jesus to do anything with what he's called us to do. We can make everybody believe that we do ministry because Jesus told us to do it. But none of us would be honest enough to really admit that sometimes we do ministry on our own. And then try to attach Jesus' name to it. And this is where Gehazi sits in the middle of. This dude has watched everything Elisha has ever done. Every miracle that has ever taken place, he has watched. He has seen. It has been visible. And he wakes up and he says, oh no, what are we going to do now? You know, we've been like that. We woke up with a bill that we knew we couldn't pay. We woke up with a loved one that we knew we couldn't save. We woke up with a crisis that we couldn't manage, a circumstance that we couldn't control, and you went under the bed, under control. You went to bed, under control, and you woke up overwhelmed. And if we would be honest, sometimes we woke up with an addiction we couldn't break. Oh, I know that's none of us youth workers. We don't have those type of issues. We don't do those type of things. Those are just the kids that we work with who have those kind of issues. Only our kids have addictions that they can't let go of. Only the parents we deal with have bills they can't pay. Only other youth workers have kids they can't save and circumstances that are way beyond their control. And then he wakes up and he sees this army, and then he puts his dukes up because he's ready to fight. And then he realizes he can't fight what he sees. He recognizes that he's outmanned, outgunned, doesn't have enough mental capacity to solve it, doesn't have the people he can reach out to help him. He understands that this is something that he can't get done, and he's looking, saying, I think I'm gonna die. How many of you have ever said that? See, that's why that one hand went up. That's where we are. We're very afraid to say, Lord, I think this is it. I don't know if I can do ministry one more second. I don't know if I can talk to one more kid, if I can take one more phone call from the prison. I don't know if I have it in me, and I'm going to take this last call, and then I'm going to crawl up and I'm going to die. How many of you, if you were real, would say you've considered walking away from ministry because ministry is just that hard? It's just that difficult. You can't answer the phone enough. You can't pray enough. You can't help kids eat enough. You can't solve their issues enough. You can't get in between another fight and break them up enough. You know you are outmanned and outgunned, and now you are tired. You are tired of the fight. You can't move your arms. You can't pick up your legs and move them the way you want to in the direction that you're supposed to because you're worn out and paralyzed by the fear that I cannot win this fight. But I'm so glad the fight isn't yours and the fight ain't mine, but the fight belongs to Him. I'm so glad that I don't necessarily have to jump in the middle of everything or anything. I can let Him jump in the middle of everything. See, the chore is the Lord doesn't, the only part, when you're an athlete, there are very important mechanisms and body parts to the way you play the game. And your knees are very important to how you play the game. And your arms are very important to how you play the game. And if you can't use those things, if you sustain injuries to those body parts, it makes it difficult and darn near impossible to participate in the sport that you're in. But here's the good thing in the fight that we have. There will be some injuries and there will be some casualties, but there will also be some healing. See, the only thing that the Lord really expects you to injure are your knees as you pray, your fingertips as you thumb the scriptures, and your hands as you lift them up and surrender to Him. So when you think about how you fight, your fight has to be different. Your fight can't be with your fists. Your fight has to be on your knees. In addition to what Larry talked about with the D kid, I'd encourage you when you get home to carve out a space where you begin to pray more than you prayed before you got here. To carve out that quiet and that secret place that you meet with the Lord more frequently than you meet with your friends. That you lift your hands and surrender and praise more than you lift it to take a jump shot, more than you lift your fork to take a bite to eat. That you would lift your hands and worship and praise to the one who saves. So Gehazi gets up and he says, Master, what should we do? What are we going to do at this point? And his prayer, Elisha's prayer, is interesting. The thing I loved about Elisha, the scripture, in my holy imagination, I'll add, he never flinches at the request. His request doesn't bother him, but with compassion, he looks at Gehazi and says, listen, I need to help him. And he prays one very simple but profound thing. He didn't ask about him picking up a sword. He didn't talk about a shield. He didn't talk about assembling the army so we could go get it. His prayer was very simple. He said, Lord, would you open his eyes so that he can see? He doesn't teach him how to raise his fist. He says, just open his eyes, Lord, so that he can see. The way out of your situation is not with your hands, it's with your eyes. It is your perspective. It is all about what you see and who you see and how you see him. And so he asked him to open up his eyes, and imagine his surprise when he figures out behind the army that was in front of him that there was also an army behind him. It wasn't about the army in front of him, it was about the army behind him. And the army behind him was full of horses and chariots and fire and arrows and swords. And if that don't convince you to fight differently or follow Jesus in a different way, I don't know what will. And he says, Lord, open his eyes so that he can see that there are more of us than there are of them. How many times do we walk into a ministry situation and say, there is not enough of us and there are more of them? And what would your ministry look like if every place you walked you understood there are more of us than there are of them? That there are more angels than addictions. There are more angels than guns and gang fights. There are more angels than drugs. There are more angels than fights. That there are more angels behind you. And if that doesn't give you theme music, that's an old, 80s theme. They walked into a room with theme music. Every time you walk into a neighborhood, you walk in with theme music of the gospel. A choir of angels that are accompanying you and walking behind you. And that's what makes ministry make the difference. It's not in your hands. It's not how much you fight and what you fight. It's not whether you know, what do you call that? WFC, whatever that is. UFC, there we go. UFC or Taekwondo, or whether you're a boxer, it has nothing to do with that. You have no reason to break the bones in your hands because you hit somebody in the face. All you have to do is break your knees as you pray. Now, I remember I told you I did a lot of fighting when I grew up, and I fought for a lot of reasons. But I did find myself in a circumstance and in a fight where I had violated all the rules I had talked about from the very beginning. I didn't take into account where I was fighting, when I was fighting, and how I was fighting. I violated a whole lot of those. And so I wound up in a neighborhood that I didn't need to be in all by myself, picking a fight with a dude that I thought was alone. And all of a sudden, he wasn't alone anymore. And there were 20 more dudes that surrounded me. And I was in the middle of a place where I was about to catch a beat down. But if this man named Ed 3 was here, he'd tell us a different story. Because out of the middle of nowhere, to this day, I have no idea where he came from. But I thank God he showed up when he did. Because I'm out there in the middle of a fight trying to knuckle up against 20. And out of nowhere, he comes into the middle of the circle, pushes me out of the way and said, I got this, P. I got this. And he wore those dudes out, beat them down. Why does that story and that fight make a difference? Because in the middle of your circumstance, you have a father that will jump into the middle of your fight, push you out of the way, and fight on your behalf. You'll never have to worry about the beatdown because he'll step in and he'll move that addiction out of the way and he'll fight it for you. So many times we're trying to do so many things on our own that we don't give him the opportunity to do what he does best, and that is stand up for his children. So when your kids, remember this, when your kids are too distressed and you can't figure out what to do and they're in the fight of their lives, remember that the angel of the Lord fights for them. Right? Remember when you get in that situation when everybody in the youth ministry you feel like is flourishing, but you have a bill that you can't pay. Remember that the Lord fights for you. right? Remember when your parents get sick, how many of us know that our parents get sick too when we're in ministry? We are not exempt from sick parents and illnesses that come up against us, but remember when that happens, that the Lord will step in and he'll fight that for you too. He says the fight does not belong to you, the fight is his. And if you'll only remember, if you'll only take the time to remember that the fight belongs to him, he'll take care of all your battles for you. There are some old hymns that kind of drum up in my mind, and because I'm not great of a singer, I'm not going to sing them. But he does say, I'll make the darkness light before you. And he says all the problems that you fight, I'll fight for you. What is dark, I'll make it light before you. All the high places, all the lofty places, all the broken places, right? All the addicted places, all the financial places, all the schizophrenic places, right? All the homosexual and lesbian places. He says, those high places, I'll take them and I will break them down. It is never about your hands. It's always about your eyes. The battle is his, but he needs you to have your eyes opened enough so that you can see what he's doing. And the only way those things happen is taking the war to the floor. When stuff gets stressful, you got to take your war to the floor. What you take it to the floor, you're getting on your knees. I'm a little old school, so I understand what shut-ins look like. Right? I understand what it looks like to tarry, right? I know when they said, I'm gonna go and close the door, I know what that meant. They were closing the door to pray. And I'd venture to say if we close the door to pray more than we open the door to play, that Jesus would do some things in our ministry and in our lives that we could not think, ask, or even imagine. It is about how much time you spend thumbing through the scriptures. How many times you're turning the pages. How many times you're turning down the plate. How many times you're on your knees. How many times you have your arms lifted before him. If you want to really fight, that's how you do it. If you really want victory, that's how you get it. He says the high places, I'll bring them down. And as I go to my seat, as a good Baptist preacher would say, I want to encourage you to fix your eyes on Jesus, who is the author and the finisher of your faith. Because it all starts with him, and it all ends with him. And so anything you're doing, like Jackie mentioned yesterday, you got two choices. You listen to him, or you listen to him. You listen to what God says, or you listen to what Satan says. You only have two choices. And if you want to be victorious in your fight, I think you know who to choose. For those of us who are sports fans, you always want to go with the winner. You don't become a fan of a team that loses all the time. But people are prone to follow a winner. And I will tell you right now that Jesus is undisputed, unquestioned. He's never lost. Even when it looked like it, he's never lost. And even when it looked like he lost, he had already won. So I'm saying if you got to pick a winner, you better pick Jesus. One last hymn before I take my seat. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name, on Christ, the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. God bless you.